Again, good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. I know I see a number of familiar faces. Supervisor Mark Borkowski here, Supervisor Chris Larson I see just coming in. If I see other members of the county board, I'll try and acknowledge them here as well. I've seen some people who've been at these listening sessions before, and others it might be your first time. We're going to spend a couple minutes at the beginning kind of going over the process, and then a little bit about today's process, and a little bit about the budget, and then the rest of the time from now until 1:30 we've got blocked off to not only talk about this, the overview, but then to hear from you. And so let's jump right into this. First off, just agenda, we're going to talk about the overview of the county budget process, give you a little bit of a historical overview on our budget challenges, and then tell you what our goals are for, looks like it's over a little bit there, we can scoot over, for the next budget, 2011, what our challenges are, some of our things that we need to tackle, and then in terms of what the timeline is and what the official process is, and then get your input. It also, in addition to sharing verbally, which we're writing down information here today, you see these blue slips that are being handed out. A number of people have already filled those out. Even if you want to comment verbally as well, please feel free to write down comments there. This really helps us process-wise because we're early, as I'm going to reiterate in just a minute. A lot of times in government, you hear people hold public sessions, public meetings, listening sessions after they've already put a package together, be it a budget or a piece of legislation or a plan. We're doing this far ahead of the official budget process because we feel that way we can incorporate the things that you raised today and at the other sessions we're going to have. So, overview of the county budget process. Again, some of you might be familiar. If I stand back over here a little bit out of the way, I'm not blocking everybody. But you can see on this pie chart, the lion's share of what we do, the biggest portion is health and human services. We also do a fair amount of our budget goes to transportation and public works. Another component, significant component, goes to the public safety, and then you see other quality of life, things like the parks and some of our cultural attractions. Where do we get our money from? Oftentimes people are surprised that only about a quarter of our budget comes from the property tax and sales tax. Major portion comes from state and federal aids, and then about 40% comes from income that the departments get, be it fees, co-pays, things like that, portion of what go in for services provided. But again, the tax itself, property and sales tax, is about a quarter. Next up, you see, okay, what are some of the challenges we have? Next slide shows, this is just a quote, the Public Policy Forum did a report. They've done a couple of reports about this, but point out that even though we've made some progress with some changes, some structural changes, there's still, like other governments, the city, the state, and others, there's still some challenges here. I'm not going to read the whole quote for you, but the next slide I'll get into some of the specifics. If you look, the red line that's below, the red chart talks about where we were early in each of those years in terms of it anticipated. It's either surplus or shortfall. You can see in those years the fact that we're below the line with the red line shows the gap. For 2009, for example, we finished off with a surplus, but that was because we had about $12 million worth of savings in health care through some very aggressive work in partnership with the county board, and particularly a provision that Chairman Lee Holloway pushed years ago to create a benefits division. That helped us put in the staff that we needed to really aggressively negotiate that and help drive down those numbers. It also came because a number of our departments last year did a series of reductions in the budget to make sure that we stop things, for example, like travel, and froze some of our other accounts to make sure that we finished off the year with a balanced budget, and in the end, because of those healthcare savings, actually had a slight surplus. For 2010, there's also a gap there, but we're taking actions to account for that as well, and we feel, just as we have in the past, we'll continue to end with a balanced budget. The next slide talks about how you can see from about 8 years ago, we've had a significant reduction in the size of the county workforce. Part of that's been through attrition. through after folks left, particularly in 2002, when there was a wave of retirements after the pension was first brought to light. There was a wave, particularly early in 2002, another wave in 2004. We've also had over the last several years a number of vacancies that were filled with contracting out for certain services like housekeeping or food services, and that shows why that number of employees over time has gone down. In fact, I'm going to move this podium over a little bit because I think it blocks a little bit of that chart. Okay. Then you see in terms of past ballot challenges, I mentioned before the health care savings, certainly that was a big part of it. We've also aggressively, as part of that change in our health care, went after wellness and disease management, very aggressively working with our employee and retiree base. That's produced good results. You see active management in terms of all the discounts, the contributions, and that's where in 2009 we got about $12 million of savings from where we were at in the previous year. Other things that have been done is we eliminated the backdrops for all new hires years ago, eliminated the rule of 75, which was your years of service combined with your age, allowed you to retire with your benefits at that point. We reduced the sick leave payouts. We issued pension obligation bonds, which helped us drive down those costs as well. And in this last budget for 2010 and beyond, we reduced the pension multiplier, which was 2.0, down to 1.6, which is where the state is at. We also, other things we did in the past and would look to do in the future, we've aggressively managed our debt. Our debt is down. In fact, if you project out to 2012, our outstanding debt is down about 28% from where it was in 2002. That helps because over time that lowers the amount of debt service that's a part of the operating budget, meaning more money for services. Reform some of our overtime procedures that were used to reduce payouts there, and working with an initiative the county board put forward in terms of what's called a green print. We've done a number of things that have helped us drive down our energy costs, become more efficient there. We've also done some long-range fiscal forecasting and capital improvements that was done not only through our administration but in conjunction with county board staff and the Department of the Audit. In the 2 budgets ago, we consolidated under the sheriff both the House of Corrections, which is down in Franklin, and the jail in downtown Milwaukee, so that's just one correctional oversight. And we've done other things that I mentioned, outsourcing a whole series of items, housekeeping, security, some IT, some other components out there, which brought us some cost savings to balance our budget. You can see those steps have changed. A year ago, the forecast ongoing showed a structural deficit that was really compounding and got more and more difficult to deal with. It leveled things off for 2010, but there's still a structural gap we have to deal with in the future. It's why we continue to push reforms in a series of areas to try and get that under control so that we're not constantly having to come back and make the kind of cuts that sometimes have been talked about in the past. That's where you really have to have long-term structural reform. The next slide shows other things we're hoping for. Continue to work with the private sector. We're hoping to see continued growth there, obviously since the fall of 2008, not only here but across the state and across the country, really across the globe. There's been a global recession. We're starting to see some early signs of some recovery, but I think it's going to be a ways off. You know, in February, the metropolitan area added about 1,700 jobs, but we're going to have to see steady growth to help us out there as well. Our unemployment rate in the metro area is 9.6%, just a little bit under the states, but again, a far cry from where we were in times like 2007 and 2008. So what are our goals? Well, because times are tough with the budget for a lot of our families, our retirees, our small businesses, certainly I don't want to see an aggressive increase in property taxes because all of us are having a hard time paying the bills that we have today. And with this economy, it'd be very difficult if there was a significant property tax increase. We at the same time want to find ways to continue our commitment to core services, safety net services, quality of life services, transportation, things of that nature, as well as addressing the long-term gap that you saw from those numbers earlier, because for us to be financially solvent, we got to tackle issues today and not just push them off into the future. You see this not just in government, but it's part of the problem that GM and Chrysler and others are facing, where they deferred problems into the future. And now that the economy's the last couple of years has been tough, it's been tough for them to get by. We need to tackle that. So what is the gap for 2011? Well, you start with where costs are in 2010. You then take into account any costs that are related to both your employees and retirees in terms of wages, in terms of pensions and things of that nature. Then you include other costs that continue, like the cost of utilities, fuel, things of that nature. Combine that with what may or may not happen in terms of reductions in either federal or state aid from both of those levels of government. And that's where you get what the gap is, what we'll have to tackle for 2011. Now that assumes you essentially stay where you're at today. So that assumes no reduction in your current service levels, no change in terms of the county staff. In terms of our projections, even though there are furlough days today, that assumes no furlough days in 2011. And it assumes that not only you keep services, you don't add them. So just to stay where we're at, just to move forward, the formula we mentioned before, this is where you get. So you look and you say, okay, well, we did furlough days as a one-time thing. If we don't continue furlough days into the next budget, that means you got to put back in about $10.1 million. You look at in terms of health care costs and where reasonable assumptions are as to where they would increase, just as they do elsewhere in both the public and the private sector. That's just under $10 million. The pension contribution, while we've got that down significantly, would be more than double where it was had we not made some market gains even in the last few months. That's still a little over $5 million. Debt service, while we've got debt service under control from where it was in the past, there still is some increase associated to that. You've got about $6.5 million of other expenses. And then something that we really didn't have in the past, but last year was the first time statewide that the sales tax went down. In the past, the sales tax has always gone up. That applied to counties and others as well. We actually have now saw a year ago a reduction in sales tax revenues, and so we're anticipating we can't continue to see even conservative increases, but that we need to adjust for the sales tax in the next year. And then other revenues, excuse me, other revenues that would come in, those are accounted for there. So the total amount, if you add all that up, is $45 million. And that's a lot of money. Now, some of you who have been here before know that we've had gaps as big as $90 million in the past. So this is about half of that. So on one hand, that's optimistic, saying we've done that before, we've balanced it before, there's no doubt we can balance it now. To counterbalance that is, you all know who've been here before, that we've made a lot of adjustments over the years. So while now it's not as large as it has been before, a lot of what maybe some would consider to be low-hanging fruit aren't there anymore. So it's a double-edged sword in that regard. If you were going to just address that solely through a property tax levy increase, that would be on the average home about a 17% increase in property taxes. Now, obviously, I'm not proposing that, but just to put that into perspective, if you made it all up just off of that, that's where the tax levy increase would be. So what are the challenges, just to continue, are you want to still provide core services. You got the gap of $45 million just to balance the budget in the short term. We want to continue, ideally, we'd like to not only balance next year's budget, but do it in a way that sets us up so that future budgets are easier to balance in 12, 13, 14 into the future. And ideally, you'd like to do it without having a tax increase. So those are the challenges that we've got out there. And I tell you that, I'm going to tell you the process here in just a minute, but I tell you that because for us, that's just a good thing to be, thanks, Cindy. That's a good thing to be mindful of as you express, concerns, interests, dreams, hopes, fears, things that you want articulated, that not only for me, but for the supervisors I mentioned, the others who are with them on the county board, those are the sorts of challenges that we face, the things that we need to balance in all of this. So process-wise, where are we at? Well, obviously now here we're in May. We're doing listening sessions in different places around Milwaukee County. We appreciate you being here at Wilson Park today. We appreciate both Wilson Park and Interfaith, who helps host us here. We are doing these, as I mentioned, early. You know, in the past, years ago, we used to do them in August, but we really start the budget with departments in June. We get requests from them. We start working them in June and July. And as you can see, by September, by the end of September, I present a proposal to the County Board of Supervisors. The sooner we get input from people, the better off we are. The sooner we hear what priorities are, or equally as important, what ideas people have, and we found this in the past, both from people who speak up as well as those of you who choose to write down things, or after today's session, if you send us a letter or write us an email, send us a fax, somehow communicate that. That's all incredibly important, because as we put the budget together, the sooner we get input, the sooner we get ideas, the sooner we get alternatives, the more we can work through those details. The later it is in the process, the more difficult it is to actually make those adjustments, to do things about that. So we're, like I said, May, July, September is when I present it. Then you see in October, the county board essentially spends that month. The members of the Finance and Audit Committee in particular hold hearings on the process until right at the beginning of November. And then in November, there's one big hearing where they have that at the beginning on November 1st, and then by the 8th they vote on the whole budget, and then about a week and a half later, if there were any vetoes, line item vetoes, meaning individual vetoes of particular parts of the budget, the county board will take that up, and by the 17th, nothing like allergies, by the 17th you know exactly what the final budget will be, because then that has to be sent to all the treasurers that are out there in terms of the next year's property tax bill. So process-wise, that's really the timeline that tells where we're at. We're early in the process. This gives you a chance to participate in that. I think that's the last slide, right? Okay. I wanted to make sure I wasn't skipping over one. Now, like I said, for us, this is a chance. And again, if you haven't got one, if you got one, we'll be collecting the blue slips on the way out. We appreciate that. If you've got ideas or suggestions, no, it's all right with the water thing. But I'll start taking, like I say, comments, issues you've got here. For us, again, this is a process for us to collect it. I know there was a lot of talk in this past year when more at the federal level when they were having listening sessions and people already had a full plan in place. We don't have a plan. We've got ideas, but we don't have a plan today. This isn't about debating that. That'll come later in the process, but this is about hearing from you, hearing about your ideas, your concerns, your suggestions, and helping us out through the process. And certainly not only for me, but we appreciate the supervisors who are here as well, listening into this and at the other sessions. So who's the brave first soul that wants to? Barbara, I figured you'd be brave enough to start out with us.
Thank you. I wanted to share one idea where I think we have an opportunity long-term to save some money, and that's by funding and doing a better job of connecting people with mental health services in the community. For example, we have a crisis resource center, which the county has been a partner in. We got a lot of foundation funding. It's really been helpful in diversion in keeping people out of the hospital, but it's about to face a funding crisis because that foundation funding is running out. In addition to that, if we had more opportunities to connect people with targeted case management and CSP, that's one of the things that we see at the hospital, that there's kind of a revolving door there. People go in and out and in and out, and they don't really get robust discharge planning to help connect them with resources in the community. That could really save money, because those inpatient stays are very expensive, from a fiscal perspective, and it's also very traumatic for patients. That isn't what people want. So I hope you'll consider that. And the supportive housing is the other piece of it. And I know you've been a big supporter of that, and I hope we'll be able to continue to see that expand in 2011.
Right.
Barbara Beckert, B-E-C-K-E-R-T.
Yeah, and on that last part, so people know, and I'll keep walking around, it's particularly important because, of course, years ago, and you were involved in many others who are here, in terms of supportive housing, where the city of Milwaukee and the county got together along with other agencies at the state level, but really other community-based organizations and the Mental Health Task Force and others. And obviously one of the great things is not only making sure that people who suffer from mental illness have access to good quality housing, but also making sure there's supportive services with that, which is where the private sector, the city, which focuses on public housing, the county, which focuses on services, can all come together. Because in the end, the total package is where, you know, people are going to not cycle back into the mental health complex. Right.
Good afternoon, everybody. Unaccustomed as I am to public speaking, I'll go anyway. Let's talk about the bus system. For 5 years, or for more years than that, you sat on the $91 million that could have helped fix the bus system. The major reason Coors Miller put their headquarters in Chicago is because we did not have an adequate bus system. I had opportunity recently, courtesy of a hit-and-run driver, to ride the bus for 10 months. The systems on the bus lines that are still running, they do a nice job. But there are people like me who do not have a car, who have to walk half a mile to get on a bus, and then have to transfer 3 times. And most of them are like me, poor. Why are you doing this? Why are you not fixing the bus system that desperately needs to be fixed? And don't tell me about the 100. And I think maybe out of that 1,700 Metro jobs, you have to subtract the 400 we lost because of Coors. I'd love to hear your explanation. I'm an ex-school teacher, so watch it.
Well, in this last budget, which the county board approved as well, we included funding for about 125 new buses. And in fact, in a couple of weeks, we're going to unveil, as part of that process, there's a whole new design that'll be a part of it as the new buses come online. Not only will they be more effective, but they'll be clean and green in the sense that they'll be more cost effective to run because they'll be more fuel efficient, which helps maintain the bus line. Well, but the part of the reason why you want new buses is because actually for each bus that's over about, if my memory's right, about 10 to 12 year life cycle, it costs about $10,000 to $15,000 per year in maintenance. So that's why you want to rotate on those, because then that actually keeps the cost under control. Sure. Well, I understand, but I know I want to make sure that everybody else knows what's going on in it.
Service. And the fact that when you need to get someplace, you have to take 3 buses to get it. You have to walk miles to do it. And if you don't have a car and you need a job and the bus line doesn't go there, you can't work. So how do you fix that?
Yeah, how do you fix that?
Yeah, how
do you get back?
Well, again, there hasn't been a full bus route cut since 2006. In the last several budgets, we worked with the county board and tried to keep the routes that were in place intact for exactly that reason, for people that needed to either get to work, to school, to the store, to the doctor, to other places. So we tried to maintain that even under incredible challenges. You had a good chunk of the gap the county transit system faced the last time was from fuel costs going up, and we needed to account for that and balance that as well as it will be in the future. But for us, we're trying to stabilize that. The buses help because it helps keep those costs in place so there's not more pressure on trying to reduce routes, but instead trying to keep them in place and ideally adding routes, not just restoring routes that maybe years and years ago were reduced, excuse me, but also looking at where new routes need to be depending on where new jobs have sprouted up. It's not just about restoring a route that maybe 10 years ago had been reduced, but also in terms of where there are new business parks. And on the $91.5 million, I agree with you. I thought the whole $91.5 million should go to the bus system. The city of Milwaukee has advocated for 60% of that. They went to Congress and got that altered for a streetcar system in downtown Milwaukee that covers about a 3-mile radius. Now, regardless of how you feel about that, but plus or minus, that doesn't help people all throughout the rest of the system who need to have access to not only more routes, but to quicker routes that get people from one part of the county to the other. We had advocated, as well as many on the county board had advocated, for that money to be spent on a bus rapid transit system. Supervisor Michael Mayo, who's the chair of the Transportation Committee right now, is trying to take at least the portion the county has left and use it in that regard.
But you had that money for a long, long time, long before I was very excited to get for the streetcar. You could have used it then and saved us a lot of money.
Actually, you can't. It's been here since 1991, so about 11 years before I was in office. But the reason it couldn't be is the stipulation they tied into that is that the mayor, the county executive, and the governor all have to sign off on whatever use of that is. That changed a year ago when the mayor went to Congress and got the Congress to change the rules so that it automatically 60% of that went to the city. From 1991 until that change was made in Congress, it required the governor, the county executive, and the mayor, which is why years ago when a portion of that was used, then County Executive Tom Ament, then Mayor John Norquist, and then Governor Tommy Thompson signed off on that and left it, which was what the $91.5 million came from. They used part of that on the, I believe it was the 6th Street Viaduct, part of that on the Zoo Interchange, and part of that on some other components. But that's where we got left. Originally it was like, I think, $241 million, and it was down to $91.5 million. I'd still like to see even the 40% we have left be spent on the bus system for bus rapid transit system, which would allow for quicker, more efficient buses that would help in terms of the speed needed when you talk about transfers, getting people around the county.
I hadn't noticed that the buses were slow. I noticed that they get where they're going when they're supposed to be. But
yeah, well, they do in terms of the time schedule, but one of the biggest factors in terms of individuals that the transit system surveys for people that don't use the bus system right now is time. If it takes, for example, if somebody lives in the west side of town and needs to go to the University of Wisconsin, say they were a student, one of the biggest challenges they said right now for people is the time that for somebody who has access to a car, it's about 2 to 3 times faster with the stops that go along that way. Having a more rapid system, at least on main arterials, would help attract more people to the system, and more people on the system brings in more fares and helps fuel the rest of the system, so that people who don't have a choice for whatever reason, don't have a car, economic, other reasons, aren't paying a bigger portion of that, but it's spread out amongst a larger pool of riders out there. Sure. Hi.
Well, something has to be done with this public transportation, because our seniors having a hard time, not only with the kids on the buses, they take the seats for the seniors and the handicapped, and also the women with the buggies. I think that something should be done for I know these women have to have transportation, but maybe a special bus for them or something, because when they get on the bus, nobody can move. They all move towards the front, and the seniors can't get off the buses. So I think this whole transportation system should be looked over, okay? Promise?
Yeah. Well, and particularly, you mentioned the first part with students. You know, that's been an ongoing challenge in terms of working with the school district to make sure that kids have access to schools. But the flip side of that is that particularly at peak times when kids are coming to and from school, it causes challenges for everybody else on the transit system. Now, we've made some adjustments in the past, and MPS has as well, in terms of they don't give passes out, they give tickets out in many cases so that they can keep track, so that the kids actually have to have a ticket to get to school, and they only get one to come back, because in the past one of their problems was kids wouldn't come up to school, but they'd still have the pass and be riding around town during the day when they should be at school. That causes all sorts of problems, not only for the school district, but for other people trying to get on and off the bus, and the challenges there as well. So we've been trying to work with MPS on that, working with the sheriff on that, particularly when they have sheriff's deputies on and off the buses, to make sure that they're on at peak times, so that they're helping, you know, make sure that there's order.
Especially 27th Street. Man,
27th Street?
Seniors are having a rough time.
Sure. Well, and particularly because that's a main arterial, but you're exactly right. It's not too far from where the Oasis, where I know a lot of our seniors are over there as well. Mm-hmm. Excellent point. Sure. Oh, I'll come over here and over there.
Hello, in the one thing that I'd like to tell you is that everything, disability services, transportation, all those things are tied together. And when you went to cut buses, what you did is put more people who were riding buses who were disabled on the van system that now costs more money because people can't walk that mile to the bus. I live on 43rd and Morgan, right next to Sunrise Nursing Home. There is about 700 people that send into you saying they didn't want the 14th bus cut because, you know, all their employees ride, or most of them ride the buses because they get, $9 an hour and try to live on their $9 an hour, can't afford cars, so that 14 bus was cut. So that put the people who live in my building who were able to walk, right outside the door, get on the bus, that put all those people now on the vans. It's now costing more money because that 14 bus was cut, and people, it's hard for me to hire employees now because they have to walk over a mile to my home to take care of me. And my problem with what I want you to understand is that the disability services, if the van system is cut, then people like me that normally would go to social things will then have to hire a caregiver. So in the back end, you're going to pay for it if we can't get out and about. Because if people can get out in the community, we then don't need as much care.
Right. And you're right about that. I mean, that's why we've kept in.
It's all in one thing. I mean, I understand that keeping me independently costs a lot of money. I get that. I work with it every day. But the problem is that if you take one thing away, then the next thing is going to cost more money, because if one thing goes away, we're going to have to go to a next thing for a support system. And I have a mother who lives in a nursing home in Franklin, where your mother-in-law lives. You've threatened to cut that. Take the transportation, the van transportation out of Franklin, which means I then can't be the supporter for my mother, which is we've got subsidized housings in places that you're talking about taking the van system away. How is that going to work? It can't. And all it does is cause people to have almost nervous breakdowns. I mean, the transportation is the number one thing, and housing is the number one thing that upsets people with disabilities, because we are now allowed to go out and live lives, and you're taking life away by taking transportation away. That's the biggest thing.
I'll come over in just a second, and I appreciate your point. I mean, just so it's clear, the transit system management has proposed it. I've never embraced in all my budgets taking the paratransit routes away. What Dave said, no, I understand.
It comes up the same thing. We're going to take this area out, and all that it does for advocates like me is make people go to people and say, calm down, we'll get it back,
Sure.
Get it back, and makes me ride 100 different meetings like this, because people talk about they're going to cut this and cut that, and they know it just can't happen.
No, I understand.
People have to get to daycare to be able to live independently. Otherwise, they go to nursing homes and it costs a lot more.
I agree with that. All I'm trying to tell you is, and part of why I'm saying it right now is in the past when they brought that, excuse me, when they brought that idea up, specifically the one which they bring up is the federal law. The mandate is you have to be 3/4 of a mile from any existing bus route. And they've talked about shrinking that, because right now we provide a Milwaukee County service beyond the 3/4 of a mile. And I've always turned that down, and if it were to come up again, would turn that down again as well, because the reality is, and what you just alluded to, which is housing, that people have made over a long term, have made housing decisions based on where they thought they could get paratransit services to get the kind of help and assistance that they need. And that's something I would continue. Now, again, I'm talking. I want to spend more time listening, but just because that's clear, at these sessions, because we got a lot of challenges, I'm not making specific pledges, because I don't even know what the department requests are yet about dollar amounts or things of that nature. But I can tell you something that's always been a philosophical belief of mine, and that is I'm not going to change when it comes to paratransit what the boundaries are, because people have long-term make those sorts of decisions. So from that standpoint, that's something you can safely take from this point forward. Oh, I do. I do, but what I'm saying is, I can tell you what I'm going to do. I can't tell you what others suggest. And in a, in a wide open discussion, I can't say people can't bring up any ideas. I can just tell you where I'm coming from, because whether it was me or it was one of 19 people on the county board, somebody could bring that up. I can just tell you what my belief is in terms of the budget I'll propose and where I'm going to be at during the budget process, and that is paratransit routes and the boundaries that concern those should remain intact. Sure. Sure. I'll come over this side, and we'll zigzag all over the place, so I'm not ignoring anybody. I'm just trying to make sure I cover all the bases.
I'm with these two people on buses. I have the city bus map here, and I live on 43rd and Howard. And we are now completely isolated. We are the largest area in the city of Milwaukee with no bus. And people have lost their jobs. There's a college right on the street. They were never informed. All of a sudden, you come to the bus stop on Monday morning, no bus.
Thank you. And those are sorts of things that we'll consider, during the budget process, both with us, with the transit system, and with the county board. Here's the mic right here.
Okay. My name is Vern, and I'm concerned about why the transit information was cut off on the phone. When you call up and ask where bus stops are and that, you can't do that anymore. That was just taken away. We have the Office for the Handicapped and Disabled, and they should have put a block or a stop to that and said how important that is to people, especially like me that have no sight, because of the fact sometimes the bus stops get moved, the routes get changed. Now we have no access to that information. I think that's absolutely deplorable. And I've said before that Don should be fired. And I'm advocating it now that, with many things that he has not done in his job, this is one of the major important things that should have been kept and is not going. I don't understand why.
In terms of the hotline itself, I think the interest was at that point was to make sure that the monies that were there were spent on routes. And in terms of helping people in positions like you were talking about, that is part of the role of the Office for Persons with Disabilities. And while I know you and I have talked before about concerns that you had, and some we've tried to address, others we've just respectfully disagreed on, is that's one that office should be involved in assisting people who make calls for that sort of information as well, and not just on an individual basis, but with the groups. There's a large number of groups that have worked long before I came with Don Nansky and with the people with coalitions he's put together to try to address those and similar issues out there. Was there somebody? Sure, over here.
My name is Stephanie Bloomingdale from the Wisconsin Federation of Nurses and Health Professionals, and we represent the nurses at the mental health complex, and I'm primarily concerned today about mental health services. And I would like to know, Mr. Walker, do you intend to make the significant and severe cuts to mental health services that you have year after year after year in this next budget? Because for year after year, you've made cuts to outpatient mental health services and also therapeutic services, like the day hospital. And these are very, very important with people that are at the mental health hospital to be able to become well. And the other thing is around the privatization issues. And just one example, I won't go on very long, but really around the dietary issues, I don't know how much we've actually saved by those cuts. And I say that because I don't know the dollar amount, and also I don't know what it's cost in terms of human costs, because we have, for time after time, reports of incidents where people are not getting the proper food. And in a hospital, food is very important for people to become well, not only in terms of nutritional value, but also the type of food. If you give solid food to a patient who really needs smooth food, they can aspirate and die. And so there have been significant problems with that privatization of the food service at mental health. Thank you.
Yeah, in terms of dollar amounts, like I said, we're not specifying dollar amounts. We're early in the process, but we have, in terms of the goal that we gave the Behavioral Health Division, which includes obviously the mental health complex, kept them intact and tried to give them some help for the 2011 budget in terms of what their goals are. Now, We're not asking, as other departments have been asking in the past, for cuts to try and balance the budget. We're keeping them intact to their budget goals, and then what they submit, obviously, that's just the first step. We start looking at when that comes in later in the summer, and then between now and September, our goal is to make sure we can provide good quality care through our staff and support networks to all the patients. We take that very seriously, as well as the safety of not only patients but staff and guests, and we'll continue to do that in the future. But that's what.
Well, parishioners, a friend of mine died at that mental health complex because of your budget cuts. So I don't believe they can care at all.
The budget reduction in the 2010 budget was largely around housekeeping. Was it largely around housekeeping? Housekeeping.
They're not going to be pleased.
Again, we've had both state and federal regulators come in and look at that. The House of Correction is run by the sheriff, but I'm not responding for him today. Other questions, comments? Sure. Here, so they can hear you.
I know that you have answered a lot of questions about transit and paratransit. But have you ever taken the bus?
Sure.
Oh, you do?
I don't every day, but I have taken the bus.
Yeah.
North Avenue.
Yeah, because riding paratransit is a trip, man. You should jump. I'm going to call you up. Can I call you up sometime and you'll take a ride with me?
I've gone with my mother-in-law before she passed, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, then. My name is Deanna Tapio. So when I call you up, you'll know who's calling you.
Sure.
Then the other question that I wanted to ask is, are you having any hearing?
Yeah, I think that's all right.
I talk loud, ma'am. I'm being very timid. Trust me. The other thing that I wanted to ask is, are you having any hearing lessons in the evening so that people that are working now could come and listen to what you're saying? Have you?
Sure. We've had them at all different times. We've had them this one. We've got one midday, one later in the afternoon, one early in the morning. We haven't after 5 because in the past couple of years when we've done that, that hasn't been our biggest attendance. It's been at the times we've had here. So we tried to account for when the most people came out. We did it accordingly. But and again, we do it other ways collecting information. My predecessor, for example, didn't have anything like this. This is something unique. He had sessions like they do in July where they just have department heads come in and talk and didn't have public sessions. The county board has a public hearing, but they have it at the tail end. They have it, I believe it's November 1st, about a month after they've been voting on the budget. And we try to do this up front, not so much as a hearing, but to hear from people so that we can account for things both to hear in person in terms of verbal comments, but also in terms of the blue slips, and then we take other information off the internet, off of emails and things of that nature, trying to get as many comments as possible.
Yeah. The bus thing, if we don't have transportation, this Milwaukee County system will close up and die, and there won't be nobody here. No, I mean that. There won't be no visitors or nothing. Same with sales tax. They didn't pass that half percent sales tax. They passed that. They forgot about that. I wrote to the editor. Thank you.
My name's Jim. Probably hit on a touchy subject, and that's taxes. I saw you had in there a thing about no taxes or increases. Why is everybody in the state and federal government and counties afraid to tax alcohol when you tax the hell out of the smokers?
And as the county exec, I can't answer for the legislators. For any of those things, cigarette, gas, alcohol, beer, liquor, all those are things that both the federal and the state can do. But the only thing that the county under the state statutes right now can tax is this up to 0.5% on the sales tax, which we currently have had since 1991 here, and the property tax, which all local governments can do. But that's one where, pretty similar to your comment about the excuse me, about the other sales tax, that requires the legislature and the governor enabling the counties to do that. Sure.
Thank you. My name is Karen Avery, and I'm the Associate Director of Independence First. We work with people with disabilities. I don't want to totally repeat what everybody's already said, but I will underscore that I think that the services for persons with mental illness and people with physical and cognitive disabilities need to be definitely kept intact. They're inadequate as it is, so I really don't want to see any cuts there. And also the supportive housing, which has been such a wonderful thing coming into the community, as well as transportation. And speaking from a personal perspective, I just recently started being a bus rider, and in addition to what you talked about having routes that are quicker, because it does take me a lot longer to get to work when I ride the bus than when I drive, it's also expensive. I mean, it's, I think, cheaper in gas for me to ride to work and back. So I think the rates need to be looked at. They have increased quite a bit over the last couple of years.
Hello, I'm James Michaelewski, and I got a couple questions for you. Sure. It all involves privatization. Each time you privatize a job, you take one taxpayer away that is paying the taxes on the county. And the question is, if you privatize enough jobs, who do we go to ask, why isn't this working? You got it now. If you take it away, well, call so-and-so. Well, your call is very important to us, and we'll get back to you in 3 days.
In terms of any of those things, I mean, you hold the people run? No, I know, I understand. I'm saying when I'm saying
it all goes together. It's not separate.
Sure. It's one of those where you hold people running things accountable. I mean, this building we're in right now is a public building, but it's run by Interfaith. That's a private entity. It's a faith-based entity that I think you asked the seniors who go here like it. It's a good senior center. A lot of the privatization or contracting out that the county does, or for that matter the state does, is done with community-based organizations like Interfaith, like some of the other social services, even some of the groups that are here today. And the key with any of those is, even with groups we know and admire and work with, ultimately, if you're going to contract out for services, you've got to hold the people who have those contracts accountable, just like you'd hold your own employees accountable, depending on what the services are. Sometimes contracting out makes sense. In other cases, for example, like public safety, it doesn't make sense. You're not going to contract out for sheriff's deputies or bailiffs or correctional officers. So it really depends on the service.
Security?
What's that?
Airport security?
Airport security is done by the federal government, the Transportation Security Administration. So we don't do anything with that, but that's the federal government. But for other areas,
court security.
Courts, sure. We do exactly what the federal government does. The federal downtown plan.
Get rid of their jobs. They've already been filtered out. We know if these guys have committed crimes or not. You don't know what's going to happen when you privatize it out.
Well, again, we're doing exactly what the current administration in Washington allows the federal courthouse to do here.
The administration is killing a lot of innocent people in the war too, and we're getting 80% of our information from outside sources.
That one, I'll take that in the context. I don't know how to comment on that one, but again, I'm just trying to listen. No, I'm just trying to listen. Yeah.
I'm saying that you're responsible right now. Buck stops here.
Sure. Well, for us, and that's why you're right. We make sure that the services that we provide, we try to hold those individuals accountable, no matter whether it's a public or private.
You're totally responsible because you have a board to balance that. But I'm just saying, if you privatize it out, we don't know who to call or what to do. Just like the people that are blind and they want to find out about bus service.
Sure. That has to be put back. That's abusive.
In terms of
to know where they're going on a bus. That's bad.
Well, again, with the bus routes intact that are in place, and for those individuals looking for new ones, particularly in those sorts of cases, that's still things that the Office for Persons with Disabilities still is not only responsible, but advocates for helping people out in the same way that the new Freedom Program we came up with a couple years ago, where we offer people who are paratransit eligible free access to the bus system, so that people who might at certain times of the year, say when the weather's like today, might want to access a traditional bus, can do that and have the accessibility and the ability to get around, and just have to show your paratransit pass and you get on and off for free versus in December when it's snowy and hard to get there. A paratransit route might be easier, even if it's not as accessible, or not accessible, excuse me, but as time is not as convenient as a more consistent bus route might be. That's why we did things like that as well and advocated that with various groups out there to make sure people knew about that as well. Nope. Just had your pin up. Sure.
Has anything been done regarding the outside of the courthouse so that somebody won't get, something won't fall on them if they enter the courthouse? Yes?
Yeah. Yeah, actually, that's a good question. And I had this happen years ago in my house in Wauwatosa, where you get one of those ice dams. We had our insurance company come in and look at that, because that's what you had, a freeze thaw, which is like an ice dam coming up there, and caused that from where one of those pieces came in. And our insurance company, because they cover that, went in and had inspectors come around and look at all that. And so they're making sure all that's secure, and that's why there was some scaffolding up on the side there for a while. But it was obviously a lot bigger with a courthouse than it is for a house, but it's essentially the same thing as what you get when you get an ice dam with the freeze thaw. And so the insurance company covered that and helped us take care of that. Good question. Sure.
Yes, Mr. Walker, I have a few questions. You said in the past that you don't want to fund mass transit. Should I give you my name?
With what?
Do I have to give you my name? I believe I sweat like crap.
Sure, yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to ask if you said in the past you don't want to use the county sales tax for buses. Well, how do you propose to fund the bus system? And I have another question.
Okay. You want to ask a couple at a time?
Okay, yeah.
I'll try and remember.
Also, why is it that buses do not come out of the station closest to where they end their routes? The 35th Street route right now, there are buses that end their route on Howard Avenue, and those buses all come out of Fond du Lac. So they go down that whole route, empty, deadheading. They don't pick up passengers. They come out the same way. Isn't that silly? Wouldn't it make more sense to bring some of those buses out of KK and Mitchell? Also, the third thing I want to ask is some of the foolish things that are going on with Route 28. Route 28 turns around currently in a park and ride lot on the south side of the route. Why is a bus route turning around in a park and ride lot when there's no service to Hales Corners? If you rode in their bus a couple more miles, it would go into Hales Corners, serve all the stores and businesses in that community. Why turn it around in a park and ride lot?
On the last two, on that one, and if you get one of those blue sheets, if you can write some of those last two questions on, I can try and have the transit system work with them to figure out. In terms of a specific route like that, I don't know. In terms of why they turn around there and why the other route, why the buses come out from there, I'd have to look. And for me to say whether it makes sense or not, I'd have to know what the rationale was, and I don't off the top of my head. On the larger issue. The current sales tax for Milwaukee County goes into the overall budget, like we showed up on the pie charts, %. And what's been discussed was to add up to another 0.5% on top of that for transit. And the problem I've had with that, and I have an alternative, is that in the past the sales tax has been advocated here and statewide for property tax relief. In fact, in 1991. When the sales tax was passed in Milwaukee County, the resolution said for property tax relief. From 1992 till 2002, property taxes went up 55%. So what they sold it for ended up not being what it was actually used on. Same thing's true at the state. I think the state, as I recall, went up 4 times with the sales tax. All 4 times is for property tax relief. All 4 times it kept going up. I think as an alternative, one of our big problems is there's not enough money in the state transportation fund, and that's why not only our transit system, but Kenosha and Racine and Waukesha and the others across the state don't get the sort of levels of assistance that the state gave to county and municipal transit systems in the past. One of the biggest reasons is there's less and less money there. Wisconsin is one of the few states that relies on just the gas tax and the vehicle registration fee for its transportation fund. I would put more money into that fund through the sales tax currently collected on automobile-related purchases. That would be one other source that would help. And even if they phase that in over time, you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars, which then could be dispersed to the various transit systems and other transportation projects that we have.
Why don't all the transit systems around the state have a march on Madison like so many other people have done? Maybe invite even some of the riders to go to Madison with them and really, fill the Capitol for a day. Talk to the representatives from around the state and get them to see what the problems the transit systems across this state are having, not just in Milwaukee,
Sure.
but in Janesville and Madison,
Yep.
all over the state.
Yeah, and that may be something that comes up in the future. Well, I think I'm looking around, making sure Barbara, you got one more question? I had that look, Barbara, like you were. Yeah. I'm saving. Okay. Yeah, there are a couple different sessions there.
Milwaukee County's got one of the most successful airports and zoos in the country, yet you keep wanting to privatize that. It doesn't make any sense, especially with the airport, since there is no tax levy dollars going towards it. Wouldn't it make more sense to keep something successful?
You mean in terms of the some of the positions that were sought to be privatized, or you mean the whole airport itself?
Well, you've talked about privatizing. You've talked about selling off parts of it. Both.
Yeah. In terms of the question here, and this, just so you know, I'll answer it, but this is not a part of our budget, won't be for 2011, but we have talked about contracting out the same way that Mayor Daley, for example, in Chicago, did the Skyway toll bridge and talked about Midway. And right now, the majority of the airport is actually privately run in terms of all the concessions are contracted out, a lot of the services at the end of the concourses, but county employees still do a major portion of it, you're right, and do a great job. Our numbers are up, some of the best in the country. What's that?
The Midway deal fell apart.
You're right. And it did because it literally the day it was going to close was the day the stock market fell apart. So they're coming back to do that again. But the Skyway is actually very successful for them. It raised about $1.3 billion for the city of Chicago. And about $500 million for their parking revenues that they got from Millennium and others out there. For us, the reason why you'd want to do that, or at least consider that, is it goes to the question the gentleman had here before, is if you contracted that out for the total operations on a long-term lease, you could take the money that you got from that and use that as a permanent stream for things like transit, taking the success of the airport, which is doing very well, and plugging the revenue you could get from that into a permanent funding stream for a portion of your transit system program. And right now you can't. Under the FAA rules, anything that is profitable out of the airport can't be spent on anything else. And so you can't use it to help, the success you have at the airport, you can't use that for transit. You can't use that for any other services out there. Whereas if you contracted it out, you could do that over time. Now, I realize, different people have different views on that, but that's at least why I've considered doing that in the past. And really, the contracting out would still keep it a public asset, but it would be in a similar way, just a longer period of time, similar to the fact that we do long-term leases for the concessions. All the restaurants and bars and that are contracted out for. We do a long-term lease. We bid out for that. It goes through the bidding process and approval process. The same thing with an idea with like that would have to be done for the operations of the airport. And the FAA, in that case, said we'll let up to 5 airports across the country do that. 1 which is large, like Midway's. 3 that are the size of Mitchell here in Milwaukee. And 1 of which is what they call a general aviation airport, which is for smaller airplanes.
History shows across the nation where privatizations of parks, zoos, or airports have been done, it has gone very poorly for the population, where their taxes actually have gone up, their costs have gone up, yet there's no exchange, no return of benefits or increased services to the community. Are you willing to commit to keeping that within the community, or are you willing to do whatever it takes?
Well, again, for us, for any contract or any service we provide, we want to do it not only the most cost-effective way, but the way that provides the best service to the public that we have. So, for example, out of the, 5,000 total people that work at the airport, all but a couple hundred of them are private employees of the airlines, of the concessionaires, of others out there. I think they do a great job in combination with the county employees that we have there. I'm just saying at a time when we face all these challenges, a number of people talked about transit, paratransit, some other issues out there. I've thought in the past, and it wouldn't be something you do for the 2011 budget because it would take several years to do this because it's not something you just jump right into. But the reason I brought that up in the past is I thought if the federal government's going to allow 5 airports in the country to do something like that, if it's running well, which would make it attractive, and you could take the money you got from that and actually apply that to a steady long-term stream for the transit system, that would be one other way beyond just raising another tax to pay for that. How you make it accountable is the same way again. We do it here. The city does it. The county or the state does it. We contract for some services. We have public employees provide other services. It's all a matter of what level of accountability you have in terms of how effective they are. Well, again, I think you look here at this place, Interfaith does a good job of running the senior center and the other senior centers they run. Catholic Social Services, Lutheran Social Services, Goodwill Industries. I think there are plenty of good examples where we contract out for services where they do well. There's other examples where we have public employees that do things, and we do very well with those. Right, child welfare is the state, not... You're right, with child welfare is a good example of accountability. The state hasn't held that system very accountable. Sure.
Haven't you taken a lot of low-skilled people out of jobs by privatizing people? By privatizing things? So low-skilled workers no longer have jobs because you've now privatized everything.
It depends on the contract. I mean, again, a lot of times we have a lot of people, for example, with... Yeah, laundry we haven't done, but for example, housekeeping or security. But a lot of the employees, in fact, the guy I saw when I pulled him with my car this morning that was working the gate that now works for a private firm was a guy who used to work for the county doing security. So a lot of the folks who were good in those positions were offered those positions, either went there if they wanted to stay at the county. Some of them, for example, in security went to the Franklin Correctional Facility because they were interested in staying with the county and in some field of public safety. So there have been accommodations made in many of those cases. Sure.
My wife and I served on a jury recently. I did last fall, and she did it earlier this spring. And it's appalling at what the pay is, because if you park downtown, you use your entire pay from your jury in order to pay for parking. Also, I ate at the courthouse cafeteria, and they'll take more than half of your daily pay just for the dinner that you have at the cafeteria. Another thing that happened is that I called the transport company in order to get the route and the times to get down there, and I got the automated system. And to tell you the truth, it took me an hour to try and get the routes and the times to get her down there and back. I ended up driving her. It was a lot simpler. So can't we do something about increasing the pay for the jury, or at least provide parking for them?
Yeah, the two different parts on the court system itself. It's an interesting mix because even though they're in the courthouse, the courts are essentially a state function. The county picks up 55% of the cost of it, which is always, as a lot of the folks who work with social services know, that's been an ongoing concern for us because the state mandates all sorts of things in terms of support staff we have to provide, but they don't attach any of the funding with it. So we're constantly with those unfunded mandates. It eats into other part of the county's budget. But in terms of things like jury pay and things of that nature, that's money that comes from the state, and that's one really where the governor and the legislature have to be lobbied in order to change that and to send more money back for the states to do that. The other part in parking, and it's one where in the past we used to have juror parking underneath the Marquette interchange. When they redid that, the state took that away for a while. We then did bus passes in there, and they have some assistance that the clerk of courts offers through that. But they ate up a good chunk of that with the on-ramp and where that other part comes underneath there where 43 northbound goes. And the state didn't compensate us for a viable alternative spot that put there. Hopefully one of the other things, and hopefully it'll be cost effective, but when they get the brewery where the old Pabst Brewery used to be, development open, that's one thing where they're interested in working with us in the state to try and have some parking for the courthouse there as well, which would only be a couple blocks away and would be pretty decent. Yeah. And some of that certain entities have land rights too, because we had the portion where literally right where 43 goes through was where the juror lot was, and now there's an on-ramp that goes westbound that eats through that. But we're trying to work with the state because, again, the state, essentially it's still the courts are a state function, but we're kind of at their mercy in terms of how they do it, and we've been trying to work with them to provide for better access for just that reason. Thank you. Sure.
Hey, Scott, how long is it going to take to bring the county employee benefit package into line with the rest of America? I mean, right now it's over 40%, and they say the average person, non-governmental, is 10%. Now that's way out, man. We're going to have a war, I'll tell you that right now. Somebody's going to have to do something about this deal.
Question was about county employee benefits, wages and benefits. In this last budget that was...
The wages are okay.
Right, but the benefit
package got pulled down.
Well, and that's where in the last budget for 2010 that we're in right now, although it not only helps balance 2010, it helps set the stage for future budgets. There were a series of changes that we proposed that the majority and the county board went along with for all of our employees, which were things as simple as freezing wages for 2010, no step increases. We asked for $30 more per month in health care, which is, to put that in context, for the HMO, it went from for a family plan, it went from $70 a month up to $100 a month. And for the PPO, it went from $150 a month up to $180 per month. So a lot of you probably might have plans that cost a whole lot more than that. But we thought that was a reasonable change. I pay it myself. And the other change was the pension multiplier went from 2.0 to 1.6, which is where state employees are at. That, for all employees, saved the county about $10.3 million, and it helps in the future deal with not only the 2011 but 12 and other budgets. As of January 1, all of the non-union employees had that. It wasn't a negotiating thing, it just happened. So for about 15, just under 20% of the employees for the county who are not in a union, that happened automatically. Since then, 3 of the unions have voted to essentially approve that same parallel plan. And there's another one voting this week, but will have a chance to vote up or down on that. There are still other unions out there. I can't get into the details because I don't negotiate that. The county's labor negotiator does that on behalf of the personnel committee. But essentially that offer has been made to do that for all of them. And that's one where it would, again, for a lot of the issues that people raised, it would help because that would help long term in terms of tackling whether it's transit or parks or behavioral health or other issues out there. That's about 48% of our budget, our wages and benefits. Sure.
Are you a county employee, sir? No? Well, I'll tell you something. When you people in the private sector were making $10, $15 an hour, we were making I only took home $33 every 2 weeks, and I had to support a family. So when the county didn't give us any raises, but we took benefits. And when the private sector had that choice, they always wanted money. They didn't think about benefits. And now they're complaining about the public employees that they're making more money. I don't think that's fair. We earned it.
Sure. Over here.
Hi, my question is simple. When are you going to have listening sessions in the evening where more working people can attend?
Yeah, it's similar to the woman who asked me that earlier over there. We've done this in the past, and we're the first one to do any listening sessions. My predecessor just had the ones that are held in July, which we also do. And in the past, the ones during the day were the most frequently attended. We had very low attendance, and we did them after 5. So we tried to put them in different parts of the county at different times when we got the peak attendance in the past, which is why we did it that way. Sure.
One more question on the transit system. I know the Milwaukee County transit system benefits everyone in Milwaukee County, including the city of Milwaukee. Isn't there any way that we can take and address these federal funds to take them from the city instead of spending them on this ridiculous light rail system?
Again, that's one where it's out of my realm, but just because the mayor went to the federal government to get 60% of that handed over to the city of Milwaukee. And sometimes you hear about the county board and I disagreeing on things, but on this one, at least the leadership of the county board and I were in agreement that that money should be spent on the transit needs that we have, not on building a new streetcar line. Even if you liked it, it takes away from the other system, and this will be more buses and more routes we could put back into the system. We're going to try and move forward with the 40% of that remaining money that we have and at least get going on that. And at some point, if the city isn't able to act on it, maybe we can lobby the members of Congress to give the rest over to the transit system as well.
Can I write my senator?
Sure. Absolutely. That'd be outstanding. Sure.
I have another tax issue. The county stadium tax was a temporary tax. It's gone up and up and up. Why can't that money be allocated to the transportation system and let the multimillionaires that play their ball games pay for their own?
Similar to your early question, that's one where the state would have to act on that, because right now what's that? But it's imposed by the state. It's not imposed by the county. The only legal tax that the county, in Milwaukee County or any county in the state, can invoke on its own is a property tax, or if they vote to pass a sales tax. Any of the authorities, be it for a stadium district authority, even through a regional taxing authority, be it through a sales tax or a car rental tax, all those things have to be changed in the state statutes and approved by, which means the legislature and the governor would have to approve those.
Complete deception was put in.
Complete what?
It was complete deception.
Complete
Deception. It was deception.
Well, they passed it on a 5-county basis.
Yeah, but it's not on a county basis. Nobody thought it was a state tax.
Well,
now it keeps going up.
You're right. The state enacts it.
You're going to do the same thing with the Bradley Center?
Yeah. I wouldn't be supportive of that, but that's a whole other debate. But yeah, any of those things are things that the state has to vote to enact.
Well, then the people need to know that when budgets, when this stuff comes up.
Sure.
Because that's complete deception. This was a tax that was supposed to be temporary, and now it's permanent.
But
Thank you. I just got here, and it might have been discussed before, but I'd like to know if there's actually a chance of us getting this fast train from Milwaukee to Madison.
I'll repeat it for you. Sure. I'll repeat it for him. He asked about if there was a chance of the state having the high-speed train between Milwaukee and Madison. And again, that's a state and federal issue. The state of Wisconsin got money, $810 million, to do the line between Milwaukee and Madison, and the governor currently is going forward with that. Whether or not that's permanent will depend on what happens at the state level.
So many people against it, and they have it in Japan and in Europe. We need it here, I think.
Well, again, it's one of those where that won't be up to the county, but it'll be up to the state and via the federal government. Sure.
Thank you.
Yep. There you go. Continue right here there.
I have a question about the stadium, a couple of them actually. I would propose like maybe they could add a surcharge on like the beverages, the concessions and tickets and things like that. And also, why couldn't the players that use that thing and play in there, why couldn't they pay an income tax to support some of the bill?
You mean an additional tax? Because right now they pay income tax. Every time they play or a visitor plays, as I recall, they pay an income tax at the highest tax bracket for that. But you're talking about a surcharge on top of that?
Well, yeah, like a county tax or something like that, because there are cities in the country that have a regular city tax, and then the players would have to pay that because they do make overwhelming salary. So it would be, I have no problem with them, with the amount of money that they make. Why couldn't they pay a tax to support Milwaukee County? And then you could also have that. You could also have a tax on the concessions, the tickets, and whatnot for the county as well.
Sure. On both the individual one on the players and the surcharge, it's similar to the question you had asked over here. Any of those things, anything outside of the property tax and the sales tax, the county has to have state authority to do. So that's one of those. I mean, we're writing all these things down, keeping track of all the suggestions today. But that's certainly something where we'd have to talk, and others would have to talk to state lawmakers and to the governor's office about that to affect that change. So it's not that we don't consider that. These are the things that we can do and what we can spend the money on.
Well, just for your information, I asked my state senator and my state assembly person to see if they could get the legislature to pass a bill that says that the seniors, when they reach the age of 70, they do not have to pay an increase in property tax. That the property tax, when they get 70, stays put.
It's similar. I think it's Illinois and some other states that have that. Yeah. Sure. Oh. Now it's not your pin up, the action.
Patty Wenzel from Third Coast Digest. A lot of the answers you've been giving people is that it's out of your realm or it's not your job, it's federal or state. What is your record or what is your daily plan on lobbying the state as the Chief Executive Officer of the county?
In the past, I've lobbied on things where there's a direct link in terms of some of these ideas. Some of them are new today that have been brought up, but really what we've tried to do is address things where you deal with things like youth aids that come back to the county. Probably one of the biggest ones, we were talking about this earlier today, is we keep getting charged more and more and more from the state for juveniles, for young people that go into the state correction system, even though we keep sending fewer and fewer there and the statewide average is down. That's because the state still operates the same size and the same number of institutions they did 8-9 years ago, even though the population is down dramatically. That's an issue where I've not only lobbied, but I've lobbied with the Wisconsin Counties Association, with other county executives and administrators, and with some of our county board supervisors to say, you need to change that and lower the rate that we get charged for these individuals, because right now it costs us more than $100,000 per kid, if you can believe that. $100,000 to send a kid into the state system. I could send, a dozen and a half kids to UW on tuition for something like that. That seems horribly out of whack, but it's because they haven't adjusted those charges, even though the numbers have gone down. Those are the sorts of things we lobby on, where to me, the state doesn't have a lot of money either, but where if they would reduce their cost and then the charge that they pass on to us, that's when we're practically, I think, we could make some inroads with the state that would have a tremendous help on us. Because if you were to cut that number in half, suddenly now if you're sending 20 kids into the system, that's $1 million. I mean, that's some real savings there. And so finally, I mean, the governor just this last week appointed a group that's looking at doing just that, adjusting the number of institutions and the size of those institutions, and that's something that hopefully would be done, or at least could be done for the next budget to save us money. Sure.
The county jail and the House of Correction have been combined under the sheriff. That's worked out very successful. It saved a lot of money and streamlined the operation. Is there any chance that other county departments can be combined?
Sure. Those are things that, we certainly look at. We had looked at that with the sheriff for years, why it didn't make sense from the past, why you have a correctional facility that wasn't under the office of the sheriff. Having one management there certainly made a big difference, and we were thankful that got through the budget process. But in every budget, we're constantly looking through and trying to figure out if there are efficiencies, better ways of doing the things that would reduce the management and the oversight. And again, that's part of these listening sessions. It's part of the emails we send out. It's part of the other things we do to try and seek out information, not only from the public, but from staff members, and we'll continue to do that. Sure. Maybe one more quick question, then I know we promised them we'd be done at 1:30, so you got to start near the top. Well, you can ask a couple, but one more person.
Only one person, huh? Yeah. Okay, all right. You say that when you privatize things, you use local firms?
What's that?
You use local companies when you privatize things?
I didn't say that, no.
Oh, okay, because I was wondering why we have Wackenbush when they're based in London. They're English. And frankly, having spent a number of years getting trained in restraints because of where I taught and the fact that I work with people with mental health issues, I could take them out because they don't have the type of training that I would want to protect me in a courthouse. I don't think they ride around in vans now, and then when the bus has trouble, they call and they go see where the bus is, and you've got about 30 seconds to diffuse a situation in that type of thing, and they can't do it. So again, I question that their ability to do that job because of their training and because of the fact they are not responsible to you. They are responsible to the boss in London.
Well, thank you for the comments and questions. Like I said, we're going to have, we've got 2 more sessions like this coming up over the next couple of days. We appreciate different times, different places. We're going to be at Washington Park and then up in the northwest side at the Elks Club off of Good Hope, where we have a food meal program there. I appreciate your time and your comments. Again, if you've got, I see some of them on the table. If you've got any of the blue sheets, Steve at the door there, Cindy's picking them up, other folks, you can hand those off. And then if you got any additional comments, let us know. We appreciate your time and your efforts. Thank you very much. Oh, and this, if anybody wanted this, a copy of this too, this is on the internet at milwaukee.gov.